Agro-tourism. That's why Curtis is here.
Have you watched it?
Wouldn't you know it?
No.
Do you
It
have
was
it?
just like
It
showed up
is.
Okay, welcome to our City Council work session meeting. It's 5:30 on the 15th of July. Like to welcome you, especially all of those people that are here in attendance and those online. And we'll get that number later. So we'll just go straight into it. On our roll call tonight, we're just going to excuse Councilman Meekum. He is out of town today. And so there's 4 on the council and myself here, ready to go. Would like to ask if someone would want to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'll do that.
Oh, Curtis.
You go ahead.
Thanks, Curtis.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm out tomorrow.
I would also like to ask if someone would offer an inspirational thought or an invocation.
I can do the invocation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Our Heavenly Father, we're thankful that we're able to gather here together as a council and community and staff, and we're grateful for the wonderful community that we live in, the city, and all the blessings that we have. We're thankful for our great neighbors and everyone here that lives here, and please guide us and direct us, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Curtis. Appreciate it. We want to go straight into the discussion items, and first on the list is the agro-tourism. I know that we've spoken about this off and on for the last 3 years, and with Curtis and the North Rollies coming together with a plan for the, isn't this over on 4th East and about 4th North, over by Chad's house? So we want to discuss this and jump right into it. And
Yeah.
do you want to take off with it?
So maybe just as clarification, this is a broad amendment consideration. Obviously, both the Rollies, the Rollies that Curtis is here representing, and the Rollies associated with the Red Barn, Jace Rollie specifically, who I worked with, and Dustin I've worked a lot with. They're the ones that have given some specific examples of things that they want to do, but really this proposal is a broad ordinance proposal, and there's a lot to it, and we wanted to bring this to a work session to discuss it with you and get some more direction from you. That's partly why Norm's trying to make sure that we have Brett here, as Brett was a big part of this discussion that we had and need for direction that we have from you. To give you a little context of how we got here. So a few years ago, we actually came forward with a kind of a proposal related to agritourism and trying to create an opportunity for farmers and agricultural users to use a little bit of creativity and some of the things that they do on their farms that could generate a little bit of revenue and really help make the farm a little bit more financially viable and in turn preserve the agriculture that they're doing. Obviously there's a lot of pressures with the market, with land values and things like that. It was something that the council at that time discussed. I can't remember, it wasn't this exact council, but maybe some of you were on that council when we had that discussion. We discussed a little bit, and then it kind of got put on the shelf. About a year or so later, we were able to adopt an ordinance that did kind of take one step towards agritourism, and that was in the form of allowing for a temporary use for agritourism. We created a definition for agritourism, and basically we allowed agritourism as a temporary use, much like a fireworks stand or a snack shack or things like that. But it was on a temporary basis. I think it's 6 months total that they can have that, and that was a great start to particularly help Curtis and those Rollies to do some of the things that they're doing now with wedding receptions and photography and stuff like that. Since that time, about a few months ago, Curtis and Dustin came in and they talked about the idea of expanding upon what they were doing. And, you know, if you remember, they originally came with kind of a yurt idea. I know they've gotten away from the yurt idea and instead are looking at doing something that are called box homes, where they can have people, you know, temporary stays, stay overnight. I think it would work really good in conjunction with the wedding receptions that they do. They've had that request for people who have done that, and it sounds like it's been pretty successful, and surprisingly a lot of people from out of town have used that facility for their wedding reception. So they came forward with that. Council said that's an intriguing idea, we're happy to take a look at it, let's run it through the process. And that's essentially what we've done. It has been a few months, but during that time, the Southridge Farms rollies, the ones with the red barn, they also were doing something that probably would fall in this category of agritourism. As you can see, some of the things they're doing there, they're putting in like a kind of a kiddie train just north of the red barn, and technically with zoning that doesn't really work. However, with the temporary use provision that we have for agritourism, that's something that they've applied for, and they're working through that process, and that would allow them to do that. It's a little bit tricky though, because what they're doing there has a lot of permanent aspects to it of a train, and, you know, structures associated with that are not intended to be temporary and taken away after 6 months, but it kind of gets them going now, and then they're kind of looking at this process and hoping that this will sort things out so they can have that there on more of a permanent basis. So we've drafted some language and started through the process, and had a couple different meetings of discussion with the Planning Commission, and I think it's safe to say that the Planning Commission in principle is supportive of the idea of this agritourism. Where this gets complicated and where this is tricky, and in working with our legal counsel, is I think everybody's kind of supportive of the principle of agritourism and helping these agricultural users, utilize the farm and utilize the agriculture in a way that, you know, in creative ways that can really help support what they're doing as agriculture. But there's other things that can happen that I think are certainly appropriate and probably welcomed in our community. However, what's always been the trickiest part with this is to regulate it in a way that you know, kind of corrals the appropriate agritourism type uses, and not have it, you know, branch out into something that was never intended, or that may be more impactful than we ever could have imagined. Now, I don't think I say that for what has been kind of used as examples through this process with the kiddie train and with what Curtis has talked about in terms of kind of the short-term hospitality services. But nonetheless, when we're looking to adopt or propose a ordinance like this, you kind of have to think of every possibility and every consequence that can come from the language that we have. So in working with Brett, and we've had hours of conversations on this and trying to figure out the best way to do it, ultimately when it comes down to is we need a little bit of more guidance from the council so that we know exactly what we need to draft. Now, to help you understand where we're at is I think what we need from you is to understand the level of impacts that you think are appropriate with agritourism. Maybe a way to do that is to share with you a couple examples that Brett and I have specifically kind of talked through. Young Living to our south, their agriculture, they grow acres and acres of lavender for oils and things like that. But they also do a number of other events there that both of us agree is probably agritourism and does a good job of kind of utilizing the farm in creative ways, but which we also think for purposes of Santaquin City may be more impacts than what the council would like to see for agritourism, and particularly in areas that are more residential in nature. It works for Young Living because they're kind of out there by themselves and there's not too much around them that they would impact with that. But I mean, they have rodeos and country music concerts of thousands of people. They have their festivals, you know, jousting and other things that they do. I don't think as great as that is, it's probably on the very high end of impact level that is probably not intended with some of the agritourism, visions that we have in our community, particularly when some of those areas are going to be more in proximity to residential homes and that. Another example that we kind of came across that may be an unintended thing is in Orem, just on the west side of I-15, at about 2000 south. There's a farm there, or a family piece of property called the Wilkerson farm, and it's really kind of turned into more of a carnival that is not just a seasonal, fall time carnival, but it's branched out into most of the warmer months of the year. It's kind of a carnival thing, probably a wonderful thing, but it's grown to the point where they've got a sliver of agriculture, and it's really turned into a most of the year carnival type of a use that brings in a lot of traffic and things like that. Again, something that on its face is probably a wonderful thing, but probably something that wasn't intended and grew into something that maybe went outside of the intentions of what we're thinking agritourism would be. So that's really why we wanted to bring this to a work session and discuss it with you. We have a couple ideas on the table, which I think generally have been supportive through the process thus far. Obviously, the council can weigh in on what you feel about it, but generally speaking, I think there's support for what's on the table, and we're trying to make sure that we're still allowing for agriculture to be creative with other things that they can do to ultimately make their farm more viable and thus preserve the agriculture that's here in our community. Now the reason, going way back, and I should have started with this, part of the reason why this is important is, at least in my career here at Santaquin, and I'm sure you've heard it as well, agriculture is a major component of this community, and it's something that we continuously hear from residents about why they moved here. So that's why this is something worthwhile looking at, is to preserve agriculture is really preserving a fundamental part of what this community is and why people love Santaquin and why they want to be here. So with that being said, and I'm kind of looking over at Brett, I don't know if you have anything you want to chime in at this point, but essentially I think to give you something to react to, there's kind of three levels that I could see that if we can get a rough idea of what you're thinking about in terms of agritourism, that'll give us a lot more guidance that we can work on. So if you think of it as option 1, 2, and 3, option 1 being very, very minimal impacts, something paramount to a roadside fruit stand. Very low impact, doesn't generate a ton of traffic. It's very, minimal, but it's kind of a commercial type of a service that could be in a residential neighborhood, but achieves the goal of helping the agriculture do a little bit more. Option 2 would be something kind of, middle impact, probably similar to a lot of the things that we already see. Not that it's within city limits, but the Southridge Farms Rollies, they do their Back 40 fall festival. It does generate some traffic, but it's temporary. It's usually about a month or two in the fall time that they do that. It's not, it's more of a seasonal type of a thing. Maybe something along the lines of hospitality, where we're at with the language right now is talking about maybe 8 of these types of units. They'd be hidden in the orchard. A lot of people wouldn't even know they're there, but they support kind of an agriculture experience and support some of the wedding reception things that they do. Again, not huge impacts, but there's still nonetheless is a little bit of impact. Option 3 would be the sky's the limit, something to the more comparable to what I explained that Young Living does. Large events that happen quite frequently and can generate thousands of people and that sort of a thing. So the last thing I'll say, and then I really want to turn it over to you and hear kind of your thoughts on this, is as Brett and I talked about this today, one thing that we think would help in this discussion is some sort of a ratio component. The examples that we looked at and explored and talked about, everything that we thought was appropriate and we thought kind of met the intention, in our assumptions of what this agritourism proposal is meant to be, is it's very, very small fraction of what these agricultural operations are. It's hard to define because, in the case of the Rollies that we have here in attendance, they probably own hundreds of acres of agricultural land, but it's all under the umbrella of the Rolly family. But there's a number of different siblings. Like which, is it all under that umbrella, or is it under the umbrella of each sibling? Like, how do you differentiate the acreage for what's allowed or not? So there's still a lot to be worked out with this ratio concept, but nonetheless, kind of as maybe a good example is the Red Barn. I mean, it doesn't work as an example because technically the Red Barn's in a commercial zone, but if it wasn't in a commercial zone, it's a fraction of the area that the Southridge Farms Rollies have for, it's certainly in the category of supporting agritourism. It brings people close to the farm, and there's an education component. It's able to purchase things that are directly from the orchard. But like I say, in the Wilkerson Farm example, the majority of that agricultural land is now a carnival, and there's a very small fraction of it that is actually agriculture. So, there's a ratio component there that can probably help with this. And I think for the two examples that have been working through this process, they would fit that because they're very, very small, relatively speaking. So, this was a tough one because there's just so many aspects of this that make this a really complicated subject and a hard one, particularly for myself and for Brett as legal counsel to make sure we get the right language in place so that we have appropriate parameters to allow for these wonderful things that are being brought forward and proposed and things that are happening right now in our community, but not opening up the door to maybe something growing into a really impactful thing that is not what we're intending with this agritourism proposal. So I don't know, Brett, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think you've really covered it, but we've talked about the proportionality, and you talked about the lavender farm to the south and the things that they're doing. That I think most people would think that's an appropriate use. It's ancillary to what they're doing. They've got a lot of property there. They do some things that you probably wouldn't consider the same way if it was in the middle of a residential area or a much more dense area. So I guess the thoughts or the questions that I've tried to raise is what really are the goals? And how do you make sure you frame something that's going to accomplish those goals and not allow it to evolve quickly into something that is contrary to what you want? If the goal is to support agriculture and support maintaining agriculture in the city, you might not want to promote something that's going to actually work the other way into encouraging people to go into something that may be more profitable, but discourages continued use of the property for agriculture. So I think those are just some of the things that you want to consider. That's why we discussed the proportionality, because what they're doing with Young Living Farm appears to be completely appropriate for where they are, and the ratio that goes into what I think you would classify as agritourism. But if it was just the arena and the things that they've got right there with a couple of acres of lavender fields, you may not feel the same way about it. Or if they expanded to get that ratio in reverse. In other words, if the rodeos, the concerts, and those kinds of things take up more of the ground because it's more profitable, and less of the ground is maintained in the agricultural use, then you just consider whether that's something you want to try and protect against, or at what point are you supporting the goal, and at what point are you providing a mechanism to work contrary to it.
So can I just offer one thing, and Jason, or Brett, you can clarify. I think what's being considered right now, what the planning commission has looked at, is a minimum of 5 acres on a parcel that this would take place on. Is that correct, Jason?
That's the language right now, but
But again, it doesn't have to be, but, and with that, what's being contemplated also is maybe an 80-20 ratio where you have to maintain 80% agriculture and the agritourism could be 20%. But again, that's not set in stone. That's just currently what's been contemplated as it sits today. So I just wanted to make sure you have those parameters of what the discussion has been thus far. They don't have to stay there. They can be far different than that. I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of what's been considered.
Do you
I'd
have
like
the
to hear
definition
from
of
Mr.
agritourism,
Rowley.
Andy? Sorry.
We've had 3 options, 1, 2, and 3 presented by Jason. I'd like to find out which of those 3 options you just heard would work the best for you. And you have to come to the microphone.
You're being subpoenaed.
You don't have to come to the microphone, but you're invited to come to the microphone and state your name.
Why should we spend a lot of time discussing something that doesn't work for them?
I agree.
I'm Curtis Rowley. I was told just to come and listen by Dustin. I'm not sure where Dustin's been with you and discussing and what Jace has been. I know Jason and I talked a little bit, but he hasn't really shared where they're at.
yeah, and
But Dustin has shared, we're trying to get to an area where we see agritourism, and I can't speak to the barn, the South Ridge,
right.
but we want to see agritourism on our farm be just as viable as 100 acres of apples. And it's very easy to do. We have a little barn over in Alpine that we're running over there. And we don't do anything but just sell out of it. And it's just as viable as almost 100 acres of apples. It's easy to do. You don't have to get way out of proportion. But you just got to have what the people want at that place. The barns have been very good at it. They've figured out what the people want, and they've done it very well. We're trying to do something different than the barn. I can go up, throw all the billboards I want, and try to drive them to our location, and it says Santaquin, they all go to the barn. So we're trying to find a different niche than what they're doing.
And I would think, Art, that's a good question, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Curtis, I think Curtis, they just want to do what they're proposing, and that's have a hospitality element and a few units. I think I give you the 3 options as we determine where that fits into it. Do you see that as a really impactful thing or a middle impact thing, or what's the level of impact that you think that would create and that you would be able to tolerate as a council member in this?
Being unfamiliar with a proposal, how much ground would your proposal occupy?
Well, we're looking at that whole 50 acres over there and using it, unless we donate 3 acres to the church to build a building on. But other than that, we're looking at that whole 50 acres and just saying, let's spread it out, put 5 little overnight things there.
Okay.
And
More specifically, how much ground would those 5 little things take out of the 50
less than a
acre?
half an acre.
Okay.
I mean, it'd be a quarter of an acre. Just be in the
Minimum
middle of the trees.
Minimum impact to the agriculture.
It'd be right in the middle of the trees.
Okay.
So people could come and we'd have walking paths through the orchard. And
Well, I don't think option 1 benefits you, and I don't think option 3 benefits the city. So I'm really happy with someplace with 2.
yeah, we're not trying to do away with our agriculture at all. We're just trying to say, hey,
Good.
let's supplement here. And
Right.
there's,
Because we're always concerned when the value of the land exceeds
yeah.
what you can earn by farming it.
Well, and you bring up Wilkerson's. It's out of business now and it's being developed. So if you want to go buy a Ferris wheel, there's one for sale.
Well, and yeah, to speak to that point, I'm not worried about the couple ideas that are going through. I think they fit kind of with what we're talking about, and we can have specific language that talks about these two uses. But it's hard to zone for those 2 uses and not account for other uses that might be similar in nature that could come that might be
What we don't want.
much more
As a city.
impactful. When I talk about impacts, I'm not talking about impacts to the agriculture. I'm talking
Right.
about impacts
To the
that those
community.
agritourism uses would bring in the form of traffic, people, maybe other types of perceived nuisances, sound, smells, whatever. That's, I think, kind of what we're thinking about in terms of the agritourism element here.
I watched a planning commission meeting, and they were discussing a ranch rezone. And Commissioner Hoffman made a suggestion that we think outside the box and come up with a special zoning with limited use,
Yep.
or permitted use things.
Right.
And that might be where we want to go here.
Well, and the ranch rezone is kind of different. It's not quite agriculture. I mean, there's certainly an agricultural element to it, but what they're proposing, I think, is way larger than what we would look at agritourism as being. I mean, the majority of what they're trying to do is going to be an RV resort, and there's going to be a little corner of their ranch that's left over. So.
Yeah. I just use that as an example of trying
Right.
to invent another zone.
And I was leading into that. That's something that Brett and I actually talked about. Is that is one of the options there for you that we could look at, is maybe create an agritourism zone, so that if somebody wants to do agritourism, there's a zoning component. Now, one of the things that Brett said that I want to expound on a little bit, and what makes this even more tricky is he said, our whole intent with this is to promote and support the preservation of agriculture. There might be unintended consequences with this, and there might be issues that is created with global gap. I'm confident that they're going to be able to manage that and look at that, but nonetheless, some of these things could interfere with that. There might be value added to the property that changes the taxing designation, and they may end up paying more taxes on it. Now, that's all up to the county and how they assess the property. But again, there's things that, while well-intentioned to help support agriculture, there could be, things that come from this that actually go the other way and make it, a little bit tricky for the agriculture to continue happening. Now, I'm confident that they can coexist. I mean, agritourism is not a new concept. I mean, wine country is a perfect example of all those acres and acres of vineyards, and they are very successful in agritourism, people coming and experiencing their farms and taste testing and all that stuff. So, as you can see, there's just so many components to this, and it's hard to create a very, very general regulation that kind of gets everything in this nice bubble that you want. It's, on the one hand, we want our ag users to be creative and to come up with these wonderful ideas. On the other sense, we don't want those ideas to maybe creep out and to become way more impactful than what was ever intended. And like I say, I think we have some great farmers right now with some great proposals. Some of these comments I'm making is not in direct relation to what they're proposing. It's for that proposal from somebody else or from whoever that might come in the future that is really pushing the limits on agritourism and the impact that they would create.
My thoughts are is the reality is that farming as a business nowadays is not a stable business. There's a lot of flux and seasonality, and the markets shift, and so in terms of creating a separate zone, I think anyone that is in the business of agriculture is going to want to be in an agritourism zone, just for the flexibility. So I don't think I'd recommend doing a separate zone, but I think that it's important that we allow most to have agritourism activities. One of the things is, from listening, is two risks, right? There's a nuisance risk, and then there's a risk that the agricultural aspects disappear. And I wonder if it is possible to define, I know that talking about like currently considering minimum of 5 acres, but if we could, similar to like animal rights or different things, to have rules on how close of proximity you are to a residential zone, and maybe rules on where such agritourism could occur on the property. Even maybe an idea of if there was something like fall festival, that big festivals that might exceed or not be within the rights of that zone inherently, that there is an opportunity for a conditional use permit, so that we do have the ability to allow people in the agricultural zone to do things that overall I think the community would benefit from, but we still have that oversight to not just have it be free reign. I think most people from who I've talked to, when they think they love the agriculture in town, they love the open space, they love the greenery. Not necessarily they're so focused on that it's a farm, which is interesting. So I would be hesitant to seriously restrict to a large amount the space that's being used. I think there's value in allowing a clear open space within a farm to have something, an events or a festival. I still think that that's preserving the agriculture. And so I'm a little hesitant on like a really harsh ratio. But I think there's other boundaries or limits that we can set for that, because I think that a lot of people, when they think agriculture, you go to Napa Valley and you go to this big farm, and in the middle of it is like so empty, and there's businesses there, there's a barn and there's wine tasting and there's different things. And so I don't know if having such a harsh ratio would be beneficial to the community, because I think most people are wanting that open natural space, and having the orchards is amazing. But I think that by setting such a strict ratio, it's going to limit the use of the owners, and it's going to kind of go beyond what I think most people are actually appreciating. I think that, and just overall, in addition to all that, I think this is great, because the reality is that the more we can support stable income in the agriculture zone, that limits the incentive to turn that into something other than agriculture. And so I'm in support of that. I just those things is just, could we do like a conditional use permit for agritourism that, like, if it brings in a large crowd, or it's without a certain amount of hours outside of like set hours, and when you could have this large crowd, how close you are to a residential zone. I still think that the ratio is good, but I just don't know if like 80-20 is that like feasible. I don't know. And how do you enforce that? I think that there's a lot of complexity there. Yes. But I do think that we need to set it clear of like agritourism, and I'm sure it is in there. I haven't looked, that it's the appreciation and exploration of agriculture.
Right. So let me jump in there. We've covered most everything that you just talked about. It's just maybe expounding on the regulations that we have, but we already have conditions and stuff like that. It's trying to make sure that we have all the necessary conditions. Mayor.
As a note, these are both already in residential zones. They're not
Right.
next to residential zones.
Right.
They exist within residential homes and have homes in close proximity to it. Not necessarily surrounding, but they're already in residential zones. So you trying to limit it to say you can only be so close to a certain residential zone. They're already in the zones.
Well, what I'm meaning is like, say you have 5 acres, you have to be within 1 acre from the boundary is where your agritourism takes place. Not necessarily that just because you border, but setting those like setback, I guess, I don't know if that's the right term, just so that it's not a nuisance. That's what I'm saying. The risk is like a nuisance, or getting rid of agriculture and replacing it with like an amusement park. Right. And
Yeah, Mayor.
Well, I wanted to say a couple of different things. We have Curtis sitting right here. Will you pull that picture back up of the farm?
The Wilkerson?
Yeah. Blow it up just a little bit. you know, you can see they've kind of interspersed a bunch of play areas and everything else. How old do you think those trees are, Curtis?
Not very old.
Maybe 2-3 years.
Yeah.
And it depends on how they watered them and whatever else. Is that a serious orchard?
No.
Not in the least bit, is it? That's not one where you would go in and spray and even harvest anything, because all the kids that have knocked all the fruit off before that got ripened anyway.
So that right there, I don't know if any of you have been there or ever went there.
I haven't. I've seen this picture.
It's the freeway. It's right off the side of the freeway, and there's, if you look to the west of that, right over there, those houses, that's where the farm used to be. That's where the farm was.
Yeah.
And they put that in, and that runs over to Geneva Road, those houses. And so it's really not, I mean, that's a really, they made a killing.
But without proper regulations, this could happen
This is what worries
without
me.
limiting what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It could happen.
You have an
Yeah.
orchard that's in there and an orchard that's working, and you expect so much for your crop every year in order to make it viable. You know,
Right.
you change the type of trees every 20 years or so, and you go to different varieties and everything else depending on what the market's kind of pushing.
They're not going to want to do that.
I don't know, you know, the footprint of the tiny home that's going to be interspersed in here. I can see the value of it, but I also am a little worried myself. How do these people feel if they really understood what they were sitting in the middle of if spraying had only happened that week or the week before then? Because, you know, it wasn't that long ago. You know, Dad's farm wasn't that big, but we had people that just moved in next door, and what did they do? They sued us because we were spraying the apples that we had sprayed for years. And the option, Dad tore the whole orchard out. I loved those trees. You know, I hated picking the fruit. I hated watering in the middle of the night, but I loved those trees. And I love the fruit. And one thing does lead to the next. And I know you know that. And I know there's good in it, because also in the back of my mind, I remember as a little boy, Lagoon. And if you went up to Lagoon in the early 60s or in the 60s, there were apple trees between the Ferris wheel and everywhere else. What did they create from Lagoon? Well, I don't think anybody in all of Farmington would cuss that right now, because most of the kids work there through the summer. It creates not only an income for those people that have owned it and grown it into something, but you know, there is a way to step into it. I remember in junior high going up there and thinking, well, this is a little bit better than the City of Fun Carnival, you know. and since that time, it's turned into a little Disneyland in a lot of ways. And yeah, there are ways to grow, but I don't know that we can stymie it all right up front, you know. And how do you look at it over time? I don't believe the Rollies have a crystal ball that you guys have looked 20 years down the road or 50 years down the road, which really may be the thing for this. What does it become? What can it become? And to me, this is putting your toe in the water. And putting your toe in the water is okay, what kind of an impact, short-term and long-term, is this going to do? Not only to the farm, but to the neighborhoods and to the city. And how can you say, well, how will that bother the city? I'll tell you what, it doesn't take much to sit in a safety meeting and just try to set up a stinking parade. And I say that because I've sat there, because it's all safety, and you're just frustrated because it's an hour long. But there is more effort that goes into that 1 hour parade than most of the things that happen in the city all the way around. And what is it all focused on? It's focused on safety. sprays? What will that do to the people that are living in those homes? What over long term do you get? Is there a higher exposure to radon, to DDT? I don't know, whatever it is in there. But there are implications, I think, that need to be weighed out, especially as we move further down the road. You know, is it a good idea? Oh my goodness. I think it's a wonderful idea because it gives some latitude to a group of individuals who are not just farmers. These men are all college educated. They all understand business. They are all wrapped up not only into the horticulture of what's going on, but they understand what you need to do for business. Do you understand that next level? I'm not sure. I've never even seen the new barn that you have, but I have seen the barn that the Walls have built over in Spanish Fork, and I assume that it's somewhat similar to there. And I know what Phil and his group are doing down on the south end. I love the idea that you're going to turn it into something. But I think we really need to make sure that we're covering every aspect of this, from parking to impact on the neighborhood to safety, long-term and short-term impacts, you know, and maybe even a vision. Where do we want to take this? And I think maybe I'm putting too much into it, but I also think there needs to be enough that says, well, it didn't ruin our farm, we're okay. We can pull those houses and plant a few more trees, but you know, there's a lot of trust that has to happen, I feel, in this. Where do you want to go with it? How can we best serve this? As Art said, we want to work with you. And I think and I hope that's always been the case. But I also know that in the city's aspect, they have to look at some things differently than maybe a farmer would, even though the farmer has had a constitutional right of owning that property and being able to make a living off it, as opposed to what are the impacts all the way around. And that's what we're trying to help with. That's what I would like to see. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure we have the answers to all of this. I love some of these thoughts, and I think they need to be incorporated. It's not going to happen overnight. You know, I know the complaints of what happens with other things that are similar to this. Most every time it's, how do we handle something if it's such a big event with traffic, with policing, with transportation all the way around, with the parking as a whole? Mm-hmm. You have no idea what it takes to just park people to go to the rodeo.
Would our parking still apply? What parking do we have already written in there, or what would apply? Like, what code would apply to that for parking?
So we don't really, again, and that's why I'm asking you the level of impact. We haven't gotten that far yet, and that's something that we're talking about. We've talked about parking and helping agriculture, because agriculture, I think a lot of the agritourism we've contemplated or thought would come out of this is not something that is you know, 100% of the time. It's usually, you know, fall festival or, you know, a wedding reception every other weekend or whatever. And so we haven't gotten into number of parking, but we have language in here that talks about the need of it not being surface fully improved parking. So like gravel parking would be appropriate because it's agriculture. It's not, you know, a full-fledged business. But at the same time, you know, this great intent of allowing for some agritourism could escalate into full-fledged businesses that, you know, over the years goes from a nice Ferris wheel and an orchard to a full-fledged theme park.
Would that parking be included then in that 80-20 ratio?
That's something that we would probably need to talk about.
Like, is it currently outlined? What is this 20% and what's this 80%?
So,
because I think that's where
yes,
it gets so tricky, and
yes,
that's where you're going to get the Wilkerson farm.
So to clarify, right now in the language, there's no 80-20 ratio that's out there.
That's just what's contemplated.
Okay. We've talked about, you know, in the Planning Commission, they spent most of their time talking about having at least a minimum of 5 acres in order to do it. And on the hospitality element, you get 8 units, and that really coincides with our bed and breakfast regulations.
I don't think you're going to have, with the ratio with the hospitality, you're not going to have an issue. I don't think in this case, or in most cases, because anyone that's doing hospitality wants to preserve that agriculture for their hospitality.
But that's true, and I think we have faith that this is going to work. But again, that's why we have Brett, and he's very good at pointing out that you can't always trust that that's going to be, I think we feel like we can trust Curtis, we can trust Jace, but hey, if there's a crack in our code, someone's going to come in and propose something that is not intended and is going to be a huge impact, and so that's why as we're trying to draft these regulations, and you've given some good thoughts for additional regulations that we need to put to really help refine this. We just need to understand the level of, and I'm hearing that there's a lot of support for and some flexibility for a number of different types of things. It's just, but I don't think we're ready to go to the young living level of impact that they make, because they're isolated, and most everything that would probably happen in Santaquin is not. It's next to homes. It's next to a number of other land uses that it may be incompatible with.
So here's a question I have is, why would we separate agritourism from regular tourism? If somebody has a piece of property and they could use it, like the carnival thing, I mean, maybe we don't want those big rides, but that looks like something I'd like to take my family to. Or if Mr. Larson decided he didn't want to build a subdivision, but he wanted to build a mining day camp or something like that, would we allow certain exceptions for things because it's a farm as opposed to somebody else who owns property? I mean, if the Rollies decided they wanted to sell apple beer, would we give them an alcohol permit because it's agritourism? I want you to do what you're doing. I think it's great, but I don't want to stop other people from doing it if they have an idea that's workable and that would improve the city.
So
Does that
Jason,
make sense?
correct me if I'm wrong, but the reason for several years ago when we went into the agritourism definition and other things was because some of those uses are not allowed in our residential zones, which is where the majority of the items that we're talking about are in.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're talking about is tourism. That's more like hospitality or a hotel or a restaurant or something like that. This is actually activity that currently isn't allowed but could be allowed. It is minimally allowed in our residential zones, and that's why it's so specific and so specialty, because you don't want to have a hotel in the middle of residential. That's not what they're proposing. Mm-hmm. But again, that's why the whole thing of this has gone to having some type of minimal or medium impact within a residential zone to support the tourism or the agricultural through what we have now defined as agritourism.
No, and I understand that, but if, like I said, if somebody has enough property and they could come up with the use, but they're not a farm or it's not technically agriculture, why would we stop them from doing that if it wasn't?
But would you have that in the middle of a residential zone?
Depends on what it would be.
Yeah.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
And that's what we're trying to make as well, is that if we open it up wide, then it could be anything.
Well, and I don't want
if we lock it down, it doesn't have to be.
I don't want to give special exemptions for agriculture and not everybody else. That to me doesn't seem right.
Well, and I see where you're going.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
But I grew up. My in-laws are 5th generation farms. I get it. I just don't want to just say, okay, we choose agriculture. I don't want to do that. If we can allow other people to do it too.
I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it's just that there's a request and need now in the community and within the agriculture zone.
Sure.
So we can address that now. But I think if someone were to come forward, then we could have that same discussion with other tourism. But I think at least we can talk about agritourism now, because we have some kind of an idea of how it's going to benefit those landowners.
Well, the big difference, to address your point, the biggest difference is if you have a big piece of property, say 50 acres, and it's nothing but weeds and cheatgrass, and they want to do, 8 units for hospitality and wedding receptions in there, well, that's pretty much just a commercial use.
Sure.
Right.
But if it's in the middle of 50 acres of an orchard, this is all about agriculture. And again, I go back to the original comment I made, or the original comment I should have made, is the number one thing that I hear is people move here because they love the agriculture, they love the farms, they love the orchards, you know, and everything that brings. So that's really that's why agritourism is the thing, and that's why it's different than regular tourism. Regular tourism is just commercial operations. Agritourism is commercial operations that helps preserve and helps to retain the character and the importance and the significance of agriculture.
Okay, my second thought is instead of creating a zone, why don't we just add this to different zones?
And that's
That
what
seems that would be easier.
that's the proposal that we have written right now. Like I say, I think we have a really good start, but again, in working with Brett, we just need to refine this so that we're not going to leak into something that we don't intend this to be. So I think we have a good start. I mean, we were thinking outside the box, maybe, you know, an agritourism zone or whatever. But really, I think we're in a good spot, and with the draft that we have here already, and some of the work that, you know, we already have in agritourism. I think you were starting to ask what the definition of agritourism is. We have a lot of good things in place. I think it's just understanding the council's appetite of the level of impacts that these types of things can create, and making sure that we are drafting the appropriate regulations to keep it at that level of impact and not have something explode into a huge impactful thing that we never were really intending with this.
And I think that's my primary counsel in raising some of the issues is you don't want it to turn into something that is unanticipated and undesirable or unwanted in the community. And so, you know, you can adopt an ordinance. You can always change an ordinance too. When you adopt the ordinance, people have got an opportunity to go into that zone and submit an application, and if it complies, you are obligated to give them a permit. And that would be one reason why you might consider an agritourism zone for certain areas, because then you're, as someone said, putting your toe in the water. You're starting a process and seeing what problems you might not have anticipated, and then having the option to correct things before it gets a little out of hand.
So as a note on that, they do have 50 acres over there, and 80-20, they would be able to develop 10 acres of that 50 acres into what they're talking about. But it sounds like he's talking about maybe 1 or 2 acres total is where that's at. And so that hard rule of 80%, I think, is very generous. But at the same time, I think it holds the intent of, as Jason indicated, clear back to our general plan some years ago. We love the agriculture. We love the idea and the open space. We don't want to go farm, but we like the idea of the agriculture and that kind of thing. And so it does preserve that to a certain extent while still protecting and potentially minimizing those impacts. Do we have X number of parking stalls? Do we have to have X number, two exits and entrances? Do we have to have, 8 units per the 5 acres or the 50 acres or whatever that is? Those are all kind of parameters that have been discussed, and how far do you lock it down? And then if somebody else comes in with idea Z, then again, as Brett indicated, you can always readdress the zoning or the ordinance, but you haven't opened it up to the world.
So, Mayor, for sake of time, I think
we've blown that.
We're not going to solve anything in the next couple minutes that we have. I think there's been some great points made. Brett and I will continue to work with this, and we'll work on bringing a draft that's more fleshed out. I think we've got a great start. There's some additional things that have been brought up. That's the only way I really see us being able to move forward with this is Brett and I trying to think of every possibility and try and make sure that we have some of the regulations that are in there that can regulate this. And I know Norm's really pushed for this. We can really be specific on the types of things that we would or wouldn't allow, and what Curtis is wanting to do and what the Southbridge Farms rollies are wanting to do with their train could be specifically mentioned as something that we're good with. So I'll take it as we got some work to do. We'll continue to work on it. I know this is not an easy thing to just snap your fingers and give us direction on, but please continue to communicate with me as we work on this, and we'll bring this to you at a future meeting and see if we've gotten closer to addressing the concerns that Brett and I have, but also meeting the intentions of what you guys have told us about.
I just got a couple of things I want to add to that. Number one is I've spent a lot of hours in meetings with Curtis, and I'm impressed he's still awake. So. What I wanted to suggest, though, is we've had better than 45 minutes of discussion on this. We don't always discuss things this deeply, especially in this meeting. There's a lot of great ideas that have been thrown around, even ideas where it was, please know that we want to work with you. I would suggest that you get with Dustin and your cousins and everybody else and say, download this off of the internet. You can watch that meeting. And they'll be able to see what the temperature is of the council, the ideas that are maybe being thrown around, and how that can maybe help. And with that, maybe add some ideas and thoughts to Jason as this is being brought around that will help you develop that plan. And I think in the long run, we don't want to end up with a Meekum trailer court, you know, if you can remember that far back, but maybe you didn't see that when you were a kid. But I did. I worked in that farm before it became that. So I just feel like there's a lot of good, but I would like you to go back and say, hey, let's watch this together, see what we can do to pull this up, and maybe come to an agreement on where we could head with the changes in the zoning that will help it work. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. City financial sustainability discussion.
Yeah. So, Mayor and Council, thank you for your time on this. I want to start off by showing to you something that's hot off the presses. This is a financial sustainability model update from Zions Bank. In the fall of 2022, the mayor and I commissioned Zions Bank Public Finance to Zions Public Finance to help us understand our financial standing and our financial sustainability. At that time, you may remember that we were looking down the barrel of a unsustainable budget that was kind of handed to us, and just is what it is, and we got through that year, but we wanted to see what it was and what it looked like for us. So Zions Bank now has 3 full years worth of data, 3 full financial years worth of data, the end of 2022, the end of 2023, and the end of 2024, and has now given us this report to help us to understand some of the things. This is not an audit. This is not a full. They've not climbed up the tailpipe and figured out every little nickel and dime and all that kind of stuff, but they've looked at our general fund and said, here's some of the things that we're seeing. And some of the things that they're seeing are, they did some comparisons. I'll put this out there so that you guys have the ability to see it. And I apologize you haven't had it before now, but again, it's hot off the presses. But one of the things that I want you to look at is the information that they've given us have shown from what we anticipated in 2022. Again, this was fall of 2022, so we didn't have the audit. We didn't have the financial audit from June 30, 2022 at the time. From that time, over the last 3 years, our actuals versus our anticipated or our estimated. So you remember that budgets are an estimate. We estimate this is how much it's going to be, and we either get this or we get this at the end of the day. What they've shown over those 3 full years is that our revenues have grown 7%. But I want to preface that by saying there's a big but there, and that is our expenditures have grown by 19%. So why would that be, right? At the end of 2022, if you remember, 8% inflation in 1 year. We haven't seen that in, quite frankly, since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. But they've helped us to understand that yes, we're growing, and yes, we try to be fairly accurate and conservative, but what we're finding is that what we estimated for revenue grew by 7% more than we estimated, but our expenditures cost us 19%. So obviously what that means to us is that the way we were going at that time and over the last couple of years is not necessarily fully sustainable. Now, in that time, I credit the council and the mayor about bringing sales taxes up. We did look at a property tax increase at the end of 2023, and that was passed, and that has helped. But even with that, we still are not bringing in the revenue in order to keep up with that inflation of those expenditures. We continue to add roads. We continue to add pipelines. We continue to add buildings that have electricity and gas and other things that we have to maintain. Lastly, I want to just point out what they've indicated to us. And again, you'll have this. They did 3 scenarios in there. They did a no growth scenario. In other words, if we relied on property taxes that we have with no property tax increase or not even holding the rate steady, no building, no continued growth in sales taxes, no continued growth in businesses, then we would be in the hole. So what that's telling us is that we are somewhat reliant upon growth. You remember last year we had growth that exceeded what we estimated. We estimated 225 building permits, and we ended up with 274, something like that. 268. I was close. Then they did an anticipated projected growth, which means, okay, we have building and we have revenue coming from increase in sales taxes, jobs, businesses, those types of things. And that's the middle of the road where we can be somewhat sustainable. But if we rely on only residential growth, and I'm not saying that we do rely on that, but this is just the summation of what they're telling us, is that with the revenues that are coming in with only residential growth, then we get behind. Okay. One of the questions that's out there with and yes, I'll mention that that the council is considering a potential property tax increase. Please come to the meeting on August 7th at 7 p.m. I've stated that in every public meeting that we've had since that decision was made to consider that. What that's telling us is that without additional revenue coming from somewhere, again, kudos to the mayor for bringing in businesses and additional sales taxes and other revenues. But what that's telling us, and the question has been, well, with all these new homes, why don't we have the revenue? Well, what happens is we found out 2 years ago, we increased 100, and so this is a report 2 years ago, 107% on the number of doors, the number of units in the city, but our property taxes only grew by 64%. We're down now because we didn't do. We only did a, sorry, Lynn's texting me, Lee. He doesn't have service, so he won't be joining us. What that's telling us is that the growth, even though we get new homes, remember also that our property taxes as a part of our revenue in our general fund is only about 16% of our general fund comes from property taxes. So with that, and without at least holding the rate steady or doing some type of a minor COLA type increase, we continue to get behind. In fact, if we were to adopt, and I'll show you this, I've got a couple of spreadsheets here that I'll show you. If we continue to adopt, if we don't consider some type of a holding the rate steady or something of that nature, you guys have all seen this graph. And what this shows us is that, yes, we continue to grow in homes. That's the blue line on the top. We're up to about 50, let me see if I can click on that and tell you what that number is, 5,689 homes at the end of June 30, 2025. And yet the state wants us to keep the revenue, or the tax rate, the mill levy rate, the same, which continues to help us to diverge. The purple-ish line here that's above the orange line is what's being considered by the property tax increase. So that can help you to understand why we continue to have a divergence, is that, yes, we continue to get new homes, but because property tax is only 16% of our revenue, it doesn't make up, those new homes don't make up for it. Plus, the homes that were here last year and prior to the tax increase for 10 years paid the exact same amount, within pennies of the exact same amount. If they paid $300 in 2014, they paid $300 in 2022.
The biggest thing is the COLA type differences, those cost of livings that come in. If we don't keep up with it, that change in the value will fall behind further and further all the time, and it's because the way the state has set up the taxes, if we don't do it, we stay where we are. It just gets spread across more people.
Sorry, I tried to show another graph there, but for some reason switching it to the screen is not working. But essentially, that's where we're at. I will provide the financial sustainability model for the council to review. It's not a adopting document. There's no action to be taken. It's just, here's the report that the mayor has asked for. They've now updated that report, and it's active as of July 1, so it's very, very current. And the only thing it hasn't done is looked at the end of 2025, because as they were preparing it, we hadn't been there yet.
Well,
and we haven't been audited.
This very graph right here, had we not done what we did 2 years ago,
Right.
3 years ago, you can see that climb with the hit that we had to take. The problem was, for 12 years, nobody did anything.
10.
It was
Yep.
all lived and funded off of growth. And because there were high growth years, they were able to pull it off. And we can't do that. We can't continue. That was Norman and my first discussion in 2022, in May of 2022. We cannot live off of this. We can't live off of growth. We have got to have assurance that we can pay any of those people their salary with knowing that we're going to get that money. And even though times have changed, we've grown a little bit more, we could maybe say there's a few other places we could tighten our belts. But you've also got to be able to go back and say, well, we can't get a vac truck now. We can't get a fire engine now. We can't get this now. When in fact, our job is to try to figure out how to do this and do it with the least amount of pain that's possible. You know, in a lot of bigger cities, they just say to heck with it and jack the price up and we'll figure it out. Or they've got enough commercial that sustains it. Most of those people don't work as hard as we do just to get our noses above the water, you know. We've got a long ways to go, and we're committed to keep this rolling, even for the next 4 years. We're going to do everything we can to make it happen. But these same kind of things will have to come up again as we go forward, because we can see even from that graph over the last couple of years, we're losing that fast. And if we don't keep on the same plane, at least with those cost of living type of costs that goes along with how it's hit with the taxes, we'll just fall behind every year, every month, every day as we go along this terrible cycle. Hopefully we'll find some good things. The data center, that'll be great. Will it answer everything? Not in the least. Will it make some really good hits and help our city? Yeah. Still if come though.
Yeah.
We don't see it, the data center, but we see all the wheels turning. We're working with it all the time. We talk about it every day. And
So I just want to point out, in the last 4 years, the last 4 fiscal years, 22, 23, 24, and 25, which we just finished, we've seen both of these extremes. We've seen where literally in 2023, 24 fiscal year, the mayor and I had to write down building permits, one line item in the revenue stream, $1.6 million on an $11 million budget. That's huge. And it was very painful to get to there, but we did it. Last year, as you remember, we just put some money aside for the library. We've got a little bit of money aside for a part of the back truck. So that's the problem with growth, is it can be here and gone.
Well,
and that's why we can't live off of it.
There's one other thing that we didn't spend a lot of time on, where you saw that one chart that talked about the 19% difference of all the spending. Well, there were some really good things that we decided to do. Number one, buy a cemetery. Yeah. Now, who goes around buying a cemetery? Not many of us, but we had to, because we have vision for the future. You know, will that money come back? Sure, it'll come back. But that's going to be over time. Did we invest money that we had? Yeah, we did. We didn't go out and get new taxes. We didn't do other things. But we've also turned some other fun things out of it. We're getting $20,000 a year to rent that property. And you know what? That's kind of cool, because we wouldn't even get that much interest off of it if that was the case, and know that we have that property, which has a lot of value, as collateral just sitting there for our own loan. So, even though I don't agree with the way that you look at all the aspects of that pricing and that comparison, we have made some very good decisions. And the good decisions are we have kept all the people. The hard things with that is because of some of those decisions, because we were not able to raise up to that 8%, and we've had to do it in increments, we've lost some people. And losing people, is tough.
It's expensive.
Losing policemen or losing firemen even. Those are people we invest a lot of money into having them trained at such a high level that they're as valuable to New York City as they are to Santaquin. And we just need to make sure, okay, we're sticking our necks out in a lot of ways. But without this kind of a financial stability model for us to look at, all of this is kind of a wish. Did we make it right? Are we looking at it correctly? No. I think we're proving that we're weighing out all the options. We're trying to jump on board, and we're trying to make those tough decisions with good information in our back pocket. And I love where we're sitting right now. I wish we didn't have to do this, but the way that the laws are written, I don't know that we have a choice. It's a losing proposition to do nothing, and we've proven it. We've proven it with, nearly 14 years of data we can produce. So, gosh, I'm glad 2-3 years ago we made those hard decisions, because if not, we would be behind millions. We'd just have to let people go. That's how I see it.
I'm happy to answer any questions that you have on that. I will send out the financial sustainability model and both of the spreadsheet graphs that I showed. One of them didn't come through very well, and I apologize for that, but it's some kind of translation error from the big screen from the little screen, so I apologize for that. But I'll send those out tonight before we go home.
Okay. Do you want to go over any of the agenda items? We've only got 20 minutes here.
It's up to you, Mayor. We can do that if you'd like.
Anybody have any questions on any of these pieces you would like to hit? We've had a chance to review them all. Or anything that you went, ooh, can we hit that?
I think the only thing is the Ranch RV Resort, but I think we're going to discuss that during the meeting. So that's really...
Well, sometimes we discuss it in this meeting, and we
So
hit
it's
it
quicker
kind of
than
as a
every
highlight in the next. So is there something
yeah.
you want to hit?
Maybe I can touch on it just briefly. So I don't expect there's going to be any action on that tonight. The recommendation that came from the Planning Commission,
Table it.
they needed to submit an application to get the process started.
Oh, okay.
I think it's safe to say the family, and kind of like our last discussion, they want to do an RV ranch resort. The technicalities in the background of zoning and code and stuff like that, they don't care about that. They just want to do an RV ranch resort. That's for us to figure out how to design that means to that end. So their proposal is RAG to commercial to interchange commercial C1. They don't care if it's that or anything else. They just did that as kind of a placeholder so they could get this process started. The recommendation that came from the Planning Commission really is that maybe C1's not the right zone. In this case, maybe a new zone or something. And I cannot believe I heard Brett say this, because we've done this before and he's always had his reservations about it. But maybe a development agreement to address this is the way to do this, because this is such a unique thing. It doesn't really fit within any of our zoning. It's hard,
Yeah.
and if you do allow it in one zone, then you open it up for any other properties in that same zone. This is kind of a very specific use.
And how many RV resorts do we want in town?
Exactly.
So if it's just a one-off thing,
That's what
why go
Commissioner
through that
Hoffman-
whole process? That's a good point.
Right. So that's really.
That was
I mean,
Hoffman's.
the Fields family is going to be here. They're going to, we have our proposal, and you're welcome to look at this in the break too to kind of see what it is they're doing. They've done a great job of articulating this vision. However, it's going to really be on the city side of things to figure out how do we allow this and how do we want to govern and regulate this. And there's a number of possibilities. Like I say, they're not going to be able to give us an answer. They're looking to us to help make that path for them. And again, if you have direction or ideas on how you would like that to look, or really, if you are just supportive of their proposal in that location, that's enough direction that we need. And this is something that staff can then go figure out maybe the best way to do it. And we'll bring that as a proposal to you, see if you agree that that's the best way to allow for a land use like this. So hopefully that gives you some context leading into the next meeting.
That was all the question I had. So, but yeah,
That's the only one?
let's get all the discussion out now. And
And looking at
I'm all for that.
the map, I'm a little concerned about traffic and accessing the property. I'm more than a little concerned, actually.
Yeah, and I should say that this is very high level at this point. We haven't really dived into a site plan type of level of review. We've had the discussion already with them and myself and our engineer, John Lindell. There is a number of hurdles that they have in order to make this work. There is not easy access to infrastructure up in that area. Upgrades to roads. We had a public hearing at the Planning Commission. The Depews are neighboring property owners, one of the few that are up around them. They came. I think they were generally supportive of the idea, but they certainly were concerned about some of the impacts that could be created, and hopefully those will be mitigated and maybe expanded roads, new roads, access, things like that. So yeah, we're probably not going to dive into those level of details at this point. Those are more site plan level details and certainly things that are important, but this is more high level. Are you okay with the concept of this? And if you're okay with the concept, it's going to be really up to them to figure out the details of if they can get the infrastructure and they can meet our current code on the impacts that and the level of service that they need to provide in order to make it happen.
Length of stay was discussed, and they said 28 days, but what keeps somebody from pulling out and turning around and driving back in for another 28 days?
Like
And
Same thing in the Forest Service.
It's just like
And
Like
You've not seen anybody that camps up the canyon for only 14 days?
yeah, exactly.
Like everything, code enforcement is a challenge. But again, if we take a route that we've talked about in maybe a development agreement, these can be things that we can specify. And so if somebody does that, then they do that. And, maybe it's a loophole. But nonetheless, I think the length of the stay is really trying to prevent
And some of these higher end resorts limit to the age of the unit that can enter the facility. It has to be less than 5 years old or something, There's all kinds of parameters here to fill.
Yeah.
All good discussion.
There would be a lot of
Absolutely.
work to do with this one, but again, general idea, if you're good with it, that'll be some good direction for us to start with.
Is there a good reason to bring up a lift station or anything like that would maybe
They're
help?
going to have to address that somehow, Mayor. So that's just like water rights or sewer or water or access on a public road. All of that stuff's going to have to be addressed. But as you have concerns, they certainly need to be able to hear those as well. But I think getting too far into the weeds on those is probably not going to help us tonight, because I'm sure they don't have those answers. They're just to the point where they're like, okay, is this something the city would be willing to consider? That's essentially where they're at
It's
right
not
now.
to work out the details,
Right.
but just, hey, can we start working out the
Yes.
details?
We got to take
Okay.
this one step at a time, and the first step is even allowing for the possibility of a
Right.
land use like this to be allowed in the city.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. We've only got 10 minutes. Why don't we close this meeting and then we can have a little break?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
You can give
Travis?
Aye.
Art?